You have an apple in your kitchen right now. Maybe on the counter, maybe in the fridge, next to something else you haven't finished. It is one of the most ordinary objects you own. You have eaten thousands of them. You have never once looked at one and felt like it deserved a second thought. It has been part of your life since before you could talk. Someone handed you a piece of one before you had teeth to chew it. It shows up in school lunches, in pie, in a bag at the grocery store, stacked in a pyramid you don't even register anymore. It is the background. It is furniture that happens to be food. Here is the thing. Nobody ever told you where the idea of an orchard came from. Not the fruit, the arrangement, rows of trees planted together, producing food for people who didn't plant them in places we now call wild. You've never asked who built the first one, or why land that used to feed people quietly stopped being called an orchard and started being called wilderness. 84%. That's the share of individual trees and palms across the entire Amazon basin out of 4,454 species studied found to be useful to humans, shaped by 13,000 years of human hands. That is the number I kept returning to, and the more I looked at it, the more the apples sitting in my kitchen began to feel different. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Not even close. I brought it up with a few people, casually, just the apple, just the number, and almost every time, something shifted in their face, a pause, a wait, actually. One friend remembered her grandmother's stories about a hillside orchard nobody had planted. Another remembered a fenced-off patch of woods near his childhood home that used to have fruit trees in it before it became protected land. And when I started asking around more, I found the same thing everywhere. Not a fringe feeling, not a specialist's concern. A shared, quiet, never quite named unease about something everyone carries and no one examines. We all have apples. We all have the orchard somewhere in our family's memory, or our town's memory, or just at the edge of what we've been told. So here's the question that doesn't go away once you notice it. How did this come to be so ordinary when it is? When you actually look at it, so strange? Here is what we've always been told. Wilderness has to be kept wild and untouched by people, because human presence, hunting, gathering, farming, burning damages nature and threatens species. Protecting these lands meant fencing them off and keeping people out, for the land's own good. And I want to be honest. That explanation is not nothing. It is reasonable. It rests on real evidence. Serious people built it from genuine research. Industrialization in the 1800s really did devastate landscapes. Overgrazing really did strip hillsides bare. The instinct to draw a line and say, not this, not here, came from a real and defensible fear. It accounts for almost everything. Almost. In Yosemite Valley, the open oak savannas and clean meadows that early conservationists called pristine wilderness weren't wild at all. They were maintained year after year by deliberate understory burning, a practice that cleared brush and grew the acorns people depended on. When that burning was banned in the name of preservation, the valley didn't stay pristine. It was choked with conifers and underbrush. The record shows this. Cat Anderson documented it in Tending the Wild. The official explanation cannot account for a pristine landscape that only stayed open because people were actively managing it. Which means the apple you're holding, the one that feels so ordinary, sits in that gap, in the space between what we've been told and what the specific record shows. And then I found it somewhere else. Not a similar thing, the same thing. In British Columbia, at Old Coast Salish and Tsimshian village sites, researchers found clusters of Pacific crabapple, hazelnut, cranberry, wild cherry, and wild plum growing together in a pattern that doesn't happen naturally. These are indigenous forest gardens, and they have received zero human maintenance for over 150 years. This is documented in a 2021 study published in Ecology and Society by ethnobotanist Chelsea Armstrong and her colleagues. The official record calls the surrounding conifer forest the natural baseline, but the forest gardens, the managed ones, were still healthier. More species, bigger seeds, twice the pollinators. A century and a half of neglect, and they were still outperforming the wilderness around them. The official explanation has no account for an unmanaged landscape doing worse than one that stopped being managed generations ago. Two instances. Different countries, different decades, the same gap in the same place, and the apple sitting in both of them. So I kept going, and the further I went, the less it looked like an accident. In the Amazon basin, 84% of individual trees and palms out of 4,454 species studied turned out to be shaped by 13,000 years of human hands. Coelho and her team published this in 2021. The official record calls this rainforest untouched. It cannot explain a jungle that is, at its core, a garden. That's a continent away from where you're standing. Same gap, same silence. In British Columbia, indigenous forest gardens, crabapple, hazelnut, cranberry, cherry, plum kept outproducing the wild conifer forest around them after a century and a half, with no one tending them at all. Same gap. North to south, the distance keeps growing. Same silence. In Yosemite Valley, California, the open oak meadows that looked pristine to early conservationists were the product of centuries of deliberate indigenous burning. When that burning stopped, the valley didn't stay wild. It grew over. The record shows this plainly. The official story has no room for a wilderness that requires human hands to exist. Closer to home now. Same gap, same silence, just louder. In New York City, the same pattern took a different shape. Seneca Village, a thriving majority black landowning community with its own cultivated apple orchard, was called a shantytown and cleared to build Central Park. The 1855 census tells a different story than the one the city told at the time. Rosenzweig and Blackmar laid it out in the park and the people. Same block, almost. Same erasure. And in Wyoming, the 1868 Second Treaty of Fort Bridger guaranteed the Eastern Shoshone and Bannock the right to hunt and gather on that land. Park and state authorities later called that same activity poaching and enforced it with arrests. The record of that broken treaty sits in Ward v. Racehorse, 1896. Different countries, different languages, different centuries. The same specific thing missing from the same specific place in the record. This is not the shape of coincidence. Coincidence scatters. This clusters. And the apple is in every one of those places. Not metaphorically. Apple trees stood in the forests of the Amazon basin's managed groves, in the British Columbia forest gardens, and in the orchard at Seneca Village. 3 separate systems, 3 separate governments, one recurring shape. You were not issued something local, you were issued something global. Here is what the official explanation requires you to accept. Not as a conspiracy, as simple arithmetic. 3 separate systems of government: federal park administration in California, municipal government in New York City, federal treaty enforcement in Wyoming. 3 different bureaucracies, answering to different laws, different officials, different budgets. In 1851, one of them expelled the people who had maintained Yosemite Valley for generations. In the 1850s, another cleared a landowning community and its orchard to build a park in Manhattan. By 1896, a third had turned a treaty-protected right to hunt and gather into a crime, and the Supreme Court let it stand. Less than 50 years, 3 jurisdictions, the same underlying move, made 3 separate times, by people who were not coordinating with each other in any documented way. I am not saying someone coordinated this. I am saying the coordination problem does not have a clean answer inside the official explanation, and the official explanation has never been required to provide one. The apple is the product of that coordination. Whatever it was, however it happened, you are holding the output of a process that occurred independently, as far as the record shows, across 3 jurisdictions in a window of less than 50 years. A window the official explanation simply calls coincidence. If you want to know what I found next and what is still standing, subscribe. I will show you. Tatuya stands in Yosemite Valley, July 1929. She has not seen this ground in nearly 80 years. She was a girl here in 1851, before the Mariposa Battalion drove her people out. Her job, then and always, was the same as everyone else's in the valley. Tend the land the way it had always been tended. Burn the underbrush each year. Keep the meadows open. Grow the acorns that fed everyone. She did this work, or watched it done, without ever once thinking of it as a system. It was just how a home was kept. She walked the valley floor with park biologist George Melendez-Wright and photographer Joseph Dixon, speaking Spanish, expecting the open, sunlit meadows of her childhood. What she found instead was dense, choked forest, decades of conifers and underbrush that had grown in once the fires her people used to set were banned. She shook her head. She said, more than once, that the valley had become too dirty, too bushy. The record shows this clearly, logged by Dixon himself in 1929, published a few years later in Yosemite Nature Notes. The record does not show that anyone in the National Park Service connected her reaction to what their own fire suppression policy had done. She was not making a decision. She was doing her job, generations of it, the way it had always been done. And that job, done exactly as designed, produced an open, orchard-like landscape that fed people for centuries before a single policy meeting ever redefined it as wilderness. Totuya did not know what she was part of when she was a girl tending that valley. The record does not show that anyone ever told her what her work meant to the system that would later erase it. That is either ordinary history or the most important thing in this entire investigation. The record cannot tell us which. I want to be honest with you about what I cannot prove, not as a disclaimer, as the most important thing I can say. I cannot show you that anyone in Sacramento was talking to anyone in Albany, or that either of them knew what was happening in Wyoming. I cannot show you that this was deliberate, and I cannot show you that the apple in your kitchen was ever meant to carry any of this history at all. It's just an apple. I chose it because it was the thread that ran through the record I found, not because the fruit itself is evidence of anything. What I can show you is the pattern. What I cannot show you is the intent. And I want to be clear, a pattern without documented intent is not proof of anything. It is a shape in the record that the official explanation has not been required to account for. I'm also aware that I've been looking for this pattern for a while now. Minds that look for patterns find them. I am not exempt from that. What I am asking you to do is not to trust my pattern recognition. I am asking you to look at the specific, documented instances I have shown you and tell me whether the official explanation accounts for all of them. It does not account for all of them. That is not my conclusion. That is the gap. One more thing I want to name clearly, because it matters. There is a popular version of this idea online that says these lands were deliberately hidden as a coordinated conspiracy to conceal food forests from the public. I looked for that. I could not find it. That specific claim is unverified, and I'm not going to tell you it's true just because it would make a better ending. There is one thing the record preserved that connects the apple to everything I've shown you. Buried under the graded hills of Central Park, archaeologists in 2011 pulled up a complete Gothic-style whiteware teapot, made in England sometime between 1842 and 1855, and a set of cobalt blue glass beads from what used to be the Wilson family home in Seneca Village. It's held now in the New York City Archaeological Repository, open to the public. It exists. It is accessible. It did not survive because someone protected it. It survived because the system that leveled everything around it didn't recognize what it was looking at. The apple is still in your kitchen. It was there before you watched this. It will be there after. Nothing about it has changed. It's still cold from the fridge, still fits in one hand, still has that faint waxy shine from the store. What has changed is what you know about where it came from. About the 50-year window in which entire communities and landscapes built around trees like this one were quietly redefined, one jurisdiction at a time, with no documented coordination between them. About Totuya, who tended a valley like this one, in California, in the 1840s. About the 3 jurisdictions that arrived at the same decision in the same compressed window with no paper trail connecting them. The apple wasn't created for you. It was created about you, about what people like you were assumed to need and never asked about. It was processed into the world by a system that had a specific designation for what an orchard was for, and no designation for what you might eventually ask about how it got there. That teapot in the repository remains. And if you look at it long enough, it tells you exactly how something becomes ordinary, not through familiarity, through the completely ordinary act of no one ever explaining why it was necessary in the first place. The apple has been in your life since before you could read. You have never been asked whether you wanted it. You have never been told what it replaced. What would you do differently if you had been?